Welcome to a special edition of Face Off. I'm Larry Levy.
And I'm Bob McMillan. New York's own junior senator, Hillary Rodham Clinton, joins us today as we face off.
And now let's meet our special guest, someone who needs no introduction, perhaps the most famous woman in the world, certainly the most famous junior senator in the world, Hillary Rodham Clinton. Welcome.
Well, thank you both. I'm so happy to be here, Larry, Bob. I'm grateful that you gave me this opportunity to come by.
Let me turn the clock back, and we go back a decade ago, and you were involved in trying to change the face of healthcare in the United States of America. It didn't work, and yet we go fast forward. We look at today, we have 45 million people uninsured. We also have a Medicare system that may be bankrupt in 10 or 11 years. We have doctors who have just suffered a 4.4% cut in treating of patients. We have a Medicaid system across the country, particularly at the state and local level, that's a real mess. Senator Clinton, where do we go from here?
Well, Bob, you summed up the problems we face very well. And in addition to everything you said, which I could not agree more, describes a system in crisis. We have some additional problems because we have countless millions of Americans who I refer to as underinsured. You know, they have insurance, but when they go to try to get what their doctors tell them they need, they often run into some pretty tough brick walls. We also have the revolution in medicine going on with particularly genomics happening. And our insurance system is not yet ready to deal with the fact that...
The high-tech costs.
Well, the high-tech costs and the potential of genetic discrimination. You know, we're all going to find out we're susceptible to something. And then it's going to be interesting as to whether or not we get coverage for that.
Where do we go, though, from here?
Well, I'll tell you where I think we go. I think we have some short-term changes that we can and should make, and then we've got to look at it from the long term. In the short term, what I've done is work with Senator Bill Frist and another group of bipartisan senators to come up with a framework to use information technology, which will help lower the costs, lower medical errors, increase, I believe, the recovery that physicians should have for the time that they put in. And we're moving that slowly but steadily through the Congress. We got our bill through the Senate unanimously. I hope we'll get it through the House. I hope it'll be signed into law in the next couple of months. That is not an answer, but it at least gives us a framework to begin hoping to get the right kind of answer in place. I'm also working to try to help small businesses deal with the crushing costs that they face. I also believe we've got to do more to encourage individual responsibility. You know, as we sit here talking, there's a big article in the New York Times about diabetes and what it's going to mean for the future. We cannot solve this problem only at the political level. We learned that in 1993 and 94. We've got to have a consensus, and we've got to have business at the table. We certainly have to have the medical profession at the table.
What I think is great that you can still smile about it after that experience.
Well, you know, it was a tough experience. I made a lot of mistakes. I made more than my share of mistakes, and yet I learned a lot. You know, we all learned a lot.
I think you call it the school of small steps.
Yeah, well, the school of small steps came from the school of hard knocks,
right.
You know, and yet at the same time, as Bob so eloquently said, we have the same problems, only now they're worse, you know, and we're back into double-digit inflation in healthcare. Who's getting squeezed? Physicians, patients, hospitals. You know, that doesn't speak well for our system.
And employers, too.
And employers who pay the bill, and the government which pays the bill. You know, I was on a panel with Newt Gingrich a few months ago, you know, another evidence, I guess.
Your new good friend,
well,
your new best friend.
You know, Larry, I decided when I got to the Senate, I was going to work with literally anybody who I could find common ground with to deal with the problems we face. I think this partisan gridlock we're stuck in Washington is so destructive. And you know, so I've worked with a lot of people that have raised some real eyebrows, but Gingrich and I were on a panel together, and he was saying that one of the things we need to do is to get a single form for private and public insurance, and everybody should have to put their same form out there so we can compare. Right now, it's hard to compare. And I laughed and I said, you know, that's something we tried back in 93 and 94 and ran into a buzzsaw of opposition. But people's attitudes have changed because everybody understands what we're up against.
All the talk of taking smaller steps and all the mini programs, and I looked at the health care proposals of all the candidates in '04. It seemed that every one of them was about avoiding a national health care system,
Right.
avoiding a single payer plan
Right.
that, if you poll, I believe is very, very popular among people. Why don't we just go for it?
Well, Larry, I think that when we were, 12 years ago, there was a lot of concern, and Bob knows this from his work with the AMA, that somehow if we moved toward a like Medicare for all system, or if we even move toward a system like federal employees have, which is a darn good system, we take care of ourselves, which kind of, frankly, I resent because I don't think it's right. But nevertheless, there's the federal employee health benefit plans. Well, everybody worried, if you get the government involved, that means then they'll tell you who your doctor can be, or they'll tell your doctor who you can do. Well, what's happened
This is all propaganda from the health insurance
well, the
industry
insurance
and others
companies
with-
do that. The
That's right.
HMOs do that. Doctors have lost so much maneuverability and decision-making authority. They've been told how many patients they have to see, how many minutes they can spend, what drug they can, prescribe, depending upon whether it's on the formulary or not. I think, frankly, a fee-for-service system with some more individual responsibility, because, look, we are heading toward a huge health crisis. Our chronic health bill is going to just explode.
And Senator, it's also impacting on industry.
Yes, it
as
is.
evidenced by what's happened with General Motors.
Well,
talked
Bob,
to-
we're losing jobs,
Right.
and Larry knows this.
Yeah, I talked to a lot of CEOs about the idea of a national health plan,
Right.
and you put the question to them: look, you're paying a gazillion dollars for health right now. Would you pay a healthy increase in taxes, whether it's income taxes, whether it's business taxes, to be able to lift that burden? And they say to one of them, if it's a fair shift, of course we would. And yet nobody seems, I think they were, the experience that you had back in, I guess it was 94.
93, 94.
93, 94 has scared everybody, including, I think, the National Democratic Party, which may have a winning issue here, but everybody's sort of afraid to confront it.
But Larry, in politics, like in life, I think there's a certain timing. And 12 years ago, I remember going and speaking in front of groups who didn't know Medicare was a federal program. I mean, there's been a huge shift in understanding and education. People really now are much more knowledgeable, and not just physicians or hospital administrators, but the average, business, the average person.
Particularly with the internet.
Oh, look at that. You can go on, you can find information, you can do comparisons. And because we have information technology, we didn't have it in 93 and 94. When Bill became president, there was no internet. There was a small, web that serviced mostly, high research scientists and the kind of people who were like 50 sites in the entire world. Well, now, with the explosion of information, I think we can eliminate some of the propaganda and the mythology. Now, does that mean we want a system like other countries have? I don't think so. I think we still need a uniquely American system. But if we had a system that eliminated freeloaders, that would be great for most employers.
What do you
because,
mean by freeloaders?
Well, I mean companies that don't provide any health insurance. So you've got working people who are not insured, they make too much money for Medicaid, they get sick, they go to the emergency room, they get taken care of. Those costs then go back into the cost base so that the taxes go up for Medicare, Medicaid, and the employer and employee share go up for the private sector. So we need to eliminate. We've got some very, very large companies in this country, Walmart being the largest, that don't insure their employees. So you've got businesses struggling to provide health insurance, and you've got freeloaders. So if we ended the freeloader system, I think you could make a very defensible economic argument that, frankly, it would not cost as much. And if we did more to incentivize individual responsibility so that people actually, like with life insurance, it costs more if you have certain bad habits. Health insurance, we're going to have to start saying to people, you know what, I'm sorry, but if you smoke, it's going to cost you more to have health insurance. If you are obese, I mean, everybody's a little overweight, but if you're way overweight, or if you're on the brink of courting diabetes, or, something like that, you're going to have to face up to the fact that you have to be responsible.
You're not concerned about losing 50 million votes from the overweight people of America now?
Well, I think that we've got an epidemic of obesity, and it's something that is terrible for the health of people, particularly our children. I mean, when you have 10, 12-year-old children being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, there is something really wrong. We're not exercising enough, we're not eating right. But the final thing that I would say in response to your point, which I think is a very fair point, we have to do a much better job of getting business at the table.
Right.
And having them look honestly at their real costs. I've had the same conversations you've had with so many of our businesses here in New York, and frankly with some of the automobile manufacturers and some of the other big, heavy industries with legacy costs. And they will all tell you the same thing. This is killing us. This is a job exporter. If we don't deal with health care, our economy is at risk. It's not just that we are not insuring everybody, but we're not going to have jobs for people to be insured through.
Senator Clinton, let me shift gears just a little bit, but it does tie in because money is at the heart of even health care.
Right.
And we go to the war in Iraq, and we take a look at the fact that Senator Lieberman from Connecticut, a neighboring state, has really taken a pretty strong position of staying the course. Other Democrats seem to have been wavering quite a bit, some even saying a pull out of Iraq now. Senator Clinton, where do you stand with regard to the war in Iraq, and what impact does that war have in the Middle East generally, and in particular Israel?
That's a very important question.
Yeah, we've only got about 16 minutes
I was going to
left.
say, we may need to stay here all night. This may need to be a telethon. Bob, I have taken the position that I gave the president authority to do what the president said he would do, which was
Do you regret that vote?
I regret the way he used the authority, Larry, because what we said at the time, what I said, was that we needed to get inspectors back in there. We needed to find out the facts because there was a lot of debate. I was one of those who believed that it was probably likely that Saddam still had some kind of weapons of mass destruction
Well, the Clinton
program.
administration had always believed
Well, that's
it,
what we believe, because why would Saddam have acted the way he did? Why would he have thrown out the inspectors in '98? Why would he have refused to have inspectors come back in? The man was pathological and in his actions as a leader. So he was a very threatening presence in the Middle East and in the world. I have no argument with that. But I regret that the president, once he got the authority, did not carry through with the inspections, because I think that you're at your maximum power when you are threatening force. And we, unfortunately, did not let the inspectors come to their conclusions. Nevertheless, I think whatever one believes about the origin of the war, we are in a position now where we've got to do the very best we can navigating a dangerous course. And what I have said is that I don't buy either position that is most prominently described. The position of stay the course, we're doing fine, anybody who questions us is either unpatriotic or stupid, right. Or the position withdraw now, get out, it's over, nothing good can happen. I instead have said, look, we have to try to help the Iraqis govern themselves. We have not had a government yet. We've had appointed acting institutions. They had an election. They're in the process of forming a government. When that government is finally formed, which should happen in the next 1 to 2 months, we have to be very tough with the Iraqis. They have to know we are not there on an open-ended commitment.
But which Iraqis do we have to be tough with? Do we have to be tough with the Shias to make sure that they at least try to get the Sunnis in?
Absolutely.
And in the end, even if they do you think in the long run they're going to be able to avoid a civil war?
I don't think we know yet. You know, so much of this is out of our control, right. And we have made, because of the administration's policies, a lot of mistakes we didn't need to make. You know, I'm on the Armed Services Committee, right. And I've had some very frustrating exchanges with, Secretary Rumsfeld and before him Wolfowitz and some of the others who, frankly, I think have been incompetent in the prosecution of this war. And that's a criticism that I don't level lightly. Right. But I think if you look at their failure to plan, their failure to go in with enough troops, their disbanding completely of the Army, leaving thousands of young men with weapons and no employment to basically go back out into society, their Coalition Provisional Authority, which I visited for the first time in November of '03, which I thought was, poorly educated about what they were dealing with and made some grievous errors. So, there are so many problems with what the administration has done. Having said all of that, I still believe that we've got for the next couple of months to try to support this new Iraqi government, to do, Larry, what you're saying, to understand they can never survive as a nation if they don't have an inclusive governing authority. They may have all the reason in the world personally to, resent and even, hate what happened to them under Saddam. But they should follow the example of a Nelson Mandela, who had every reason to despise the white regime, and yet when he came in knew that there would be no South Africa if he wasn't able to exemplify, how we were going to work with people who weren't the worst, punish the worst, put them on trial, make sure that they pay for their, evil ways. But you can't condemn the entire Sunni population. So I'm hoping that once we see who will be in the governing authority, then we have to say three things to them. Number one, you cannot count on us to be there supporting you unless you take steps to put the house in order. You've got to have a military that can function. I was very discouraged when last week we'd worked with a very accomplished professional military officer. He happened to be Sunni, but he seemed to be very professional. And the United States was ready to turn over control over Baghdad to his command authority. And all of a sudden, the Shiites said, oh no, we don't want a Sunni in charge of Baghdad. That won't work. Right. You've got to develop some element of cooperation. Secondly, we have to send a very clear signal to the neighbors who are primarily, other than Iran, Sunni, to say, you got to help make this work. Do you want a civil war on your doorstep, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Jordan, Turkey, Syria? Or do you want to try to stabilize Iraq? And we have to send a very tough message to Iran that we are not going to tolerate their nuclear ambitions and we are not going to tolerate their messing in Iraq. Now, you can't do that just by rhetoric. You've got to have a process. And I've urged the administration to do that. And, my patience is not eternal. I have tried to be supportive where I could. I've been very, very critical of their conduct of the war. But at some point, I may get to the, the position that their policy is not helping, and we're not in the best way moving us toward a stable Iraq. But right now, I'm going to do everything I can to try to create those conditions.
Senator, I'm going to come to a political question, and it has nothing to do with you. That's what I want to make absolutely clear. What I'd like to hear from you seriously, if you're looking ahead to 2008, who do you see Democrats on the scene who you feel could be in there in terms of a presidential race as Democrats?
Well, Bob, obviously this
Decide
is
yourself.
not about me.
Gary, I did not go there.
I'll ask a question about you then.
No, but
I did not go there.
But let me start by saying, we have a lot of really accomplished Democratic senators, governors, House members, and, for example, on Iraq, we came up with a united position. It covered everybody. We got 79 votes on a bipartisan basis to do exactly what I'm saying, which is to have a set of, benchmarks and timetables that the Iraqis have to meet so that we can define what success is. That covered everybody from Joe Lieberman to, Russ Feingold. Everybody in the Democratic Party voted for that in an overwhelming way, as did, a lot of Republicans. I think that we've got a number of people who have great ideas about domestic policy, who have been working on issues like how we become energy independent, how we deal with the challenge of global climate change, which is real despite the administration's refusal to admit that, how we deal with health care, what we're going to do to stimulate the economy, how on earth we get back to fiscal responsibility, which is a ticking time bomb.
Yet there are people
do you want to name any of those
I don't want to put anybody in an awkward position, but we're going to...
Only one of them gets about 54% in the polls.
I would predict, though, Bob, that we will have about 10 or 12 people on both sides running. This is the first open election.
No vice president running.
That's right, no vice president running.
But you know what the pundits are going to say if they're in a sarcastic mood? It'll be Snow White and the 7, 8, 9 dwarfs. Right now you are leading in the polls. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing this early on. Yet, with all the support you're getting, and you're getting good numbers in swing states as well, there are still people within the Democratic Party who say, my God, a New York Democrat, or somebody named Hillary Clinton cannot possibly win as a Democrat, that you must go to somebody in the South, that we learned a lesson from Kerry, that now we have to go south. What do you tell people who look at you with a straight face and say, somebody like you could never possibly win?
I say, I'm running for re-election to the United States Senate in New York.
Senator Clinton.
I know that the people of New York took a big chance on me back in 2000, and You know, I am so grateful for that vote of confidence that I was given, and I've tried really hard to work, every single day to earn that
Well, Jean
trust.
Pirro tried to come at you when she started running with the stepping stone. Oh, Hillary, which I thought was a little smarmy calling you Hillary. All she's running for re-election now is a stepping stone to president. And that didn't work with people. So I think they pretty much rejected this whole carpetbagger.
But let me, Senator, if I could take you off the hook on that question of Larry's, because let me go local, because all
Yes.
politics is
Right.
local.
They really are.
And you have done some things where, even though the show is seen also up in the Albany area, if you go
New
particularly
Jersey as
go to
well.
Long Island and you look at Jones Beach dredging with Peter King, you look at things like you've done at Brookhaven National Lab. How do you get involved in these local things? Does somebody pick up the phone and call you, or the congressman? And I think the fact that you've reached across the aisle with Frist with regard to the electronic health records takes away some of that polarization. But how do you get involved locally as a U.S. Senator?
Well, that's a great question, Bob, because I feel that as a senator, part of my job is to know what's going on locally that has any potential connection to my federal responsibilities. I have a great staff out here on the island and a lot of friends and supporters who keep me informed about all kinds of things that are going on.
And you have civil operations up in the North Country
I do.
and in Albany area. And
Right,
the like
across
there.
the state. And I also like to spend time out here, listening to people. I really think listening is highly underrated in the political world because, too often we're talking and you can't learn anything if you're the one talking. And on the issues you mentioned, or just today, I came from a nonprofit summit where I was just earlier, something that I helped to initiate because we have wonderful institutions on Long Island that take care of the homeless and feed the hungry and deal with domestic violence and
it runs counter to the myth in suburbia, which has made this suburban renewal initiative that you, I guess it was a year ago you rolled it out. It's made it a hard sell in Washington because people see the suburbs as one of the wealthiest areas on the planet, and you're asking for federal help for problems. How could there possibly be problems in suburbia? Yet the room was filled with a lot of want and a lot of need.
And Larry, you've written about this eloquently, because you are one of the few people, I think, in the country, honestly, who has said, wait a minute, we've had federal policies directing resources to rural areas, mostly, agriculture, farm support kinds of programs. We've had federal policies that have disproportionately benefited urban areas. And everybody's kind of thought, well, the suburbs for the last 50 plus years, that's where people go and they have no problems. They just live together in harmony and there's no difficulty. Well, we know that that's a myth. And the myth of, suburban affluence was one of the panel discussions. I think Tom Swazi and Steve Levy and others were there to talk about the statistics, things that I know about because of the work that I do. I'll give you a quick example. There's a federal program that does provide help for food pantries and other emergency support services for people with hunger. Now, you would think, well, gosh, Nassau and Suffolk County don't need that. Well, the fact is we do. In fact, Steve Israel and I had an event a few months ago with the families of our military members, both active duty, National Guard, and Reserve, because about 3% of our military members' families are eligible for food stamps. So we had food pantries that were seeing an upsurge with the young families of National Guard and Reserve and active duty members who had been off in Iraq and Afghanistan. So there's a federal program that's supposed to help. Suffolk County's gotten money for that for many, many years, and then all of a sudden they said, oh, but we've looked at the county-wide statistics. Well, sure, if you take the Hamptons, you take everybody, you add it in, it looks like Suffolk County's doing really well.
Right.
If you go to the unincorporated areas and some of the other pockets of poverty or hunger, we've got the same kind of issues that other people do.
And the suburbs are also an important voting bloc. Nobody wins the presidency, nobody carries Congress without carrying suburban districts.
That's right.
And I'm wondering if one of the reasons you've had a hard time getting bipartisan support from this, particularly in the Senate, is they maybe see this as, well, it's Hillary Clinton trying to curry favor with not just the soccer moms, but the soccer dads by appealing to the suburbs. That this has gotten caught up in politics.
I don't think so. I think, Larry, Peter King's my lead sponsor in the House. I think the problem is that we're in this deep deficit. So when I come forth and I say the funding formulas are not fair to the suburbs, we have some of the oldest suburbs in the country, in Westchester, on Long Island. You've got places that are really little cities that used to be considered suburbs. but we're in this huge debt and deficit situation, which is horrible, and we're about to once again run up against the debt limit of the country, and I have voted against raising the debt limit, which of course has to be done because we have to be able to pay our obligations, but we have no plan for getting out of our deficit and debt situation. So I think it's more the fact that, in our bill we ask for some money that will provide grants to do some creative approaches for the suburbs, and nobody wants to spend money on anything new.
Senator Steve Israel and a congressman from Illinois, Republican Thompson, have created a group reaching across the aisle to stop the polarization, to stop the bitter rhetoric. What is at the heart of that bitter rhetoric in the Congress, and what do you think can be done to bring people together? Because I think the country is starting to get tired of it.
I hope so, Bob, because until the country's tired of it and people vote and send a message that they're tired of it, I'm afraid it might continue, and there are several reasons for that. I mean, one is that we live in a political culture right now that is driven by not shows like this where we're having a conversation, but where people are yelling at each other. Where I think there's a linguist at Georgetown, Deborah Tannen, who calls it the argument culture, and so that extremism really plays well in the media.
And Senator, with that, I'd like to thank you for joining us.
To be continued, I hope.
It was great to have you with us. We're just kind of running out of time.
Right. And I'd like to thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time when we face off.